Dominic Sterling was the kind of man who could buy a country before breakfast, but he couldn't solve the equation on the napkin in front of him. He thought Cassidy was just a waitress looking for a tip. He thought she was guessing. But when she picked up that red marker and corrected a mistake that was about to cost his company $4 billion, the room went dead silent. Who was this girl? Why was a math prodigy wiping tables at a diner? And why was the man closest to Dominic terrified that she had just figured out his secret? Stay tuned, because the truth about the waitress and the formula will blow your mind. The rain hammered against the plate glass windows of the Grind, a coffee shop that sat uncomfortably on the border between the gritty docks and the gleaming steel towers of the financial district. It was 5:30 a.m. Cassidy Miller tightened the strings of her grey apron, the fabric rough against her waist. She hated the smell of this place, burnt espresso and damp wool coats, but it was the only place that offered her the hours she needed. Her shift ended at 2 p.m., which gave her exactly 45 minutes to catch the subway to the rehab center across town to see Lily. Table 4 needs a refill, Cass. Stop dreaming. The manager, a man named Rick who sweated even in winter, barked from the counter. Cassidy didn't flinch. She grabbed the pot of dark roast. She was used to being invisible. To Rick, she was a slow employee. To the customers, she was a pair of hands delivering caffeine. To the world, she was a dropout, a failure who had vanished from the academic map 3 years ago. Nobody knew that inside her head, numbers were constantly dancing. It wasn't something she could control. As she poured coffee into a white ceramic mug, she wasn't just seeing liquid. She was calculating the fluid dynamics, the viscosity, the rate of cooling based on the ambient room temperature of 68 degrees. She approached table 4. It was the same man as always, Dominic Sterling. Everyone knew who Dominic Sterling was. You couldn't walk past a newsstand without seeing his face on Forbes or the Wall Street Journal. He was the CEO of Sterling Holloway, a private equity firm that ate smaller companies for sport. He was 32, handsome in a sharp, predatory way, and famously cruel to anyone who wasted his time. He never looked up when Cassidy poured his coffee. He was always buried in documents, his brow furrowed, a gold fountain pen tapping rhythmically against the table. Today he wasn't alone. Sitting across from him was Preston Hayes, his CFO. Preston was older, slicker, the kind of man who smiled with his mouth but never his eyes. "The valuation is solid, Dom," Preston was saying, his voice low but carrying the weight of a man trying too hard to be convincing. "The acquisition of Cyberdyne Logistics is a no-brainer. Their quarterly projections are up 12%. Cassidy poured the coffee slowly. She shouldn't listen. It was against the rules, but the papers were spread out over the table. She saw a graph, a projection model based on a standard Gaussian copula function. Her eyes narrowed. She saw the error instantly. It was subtle, buried in the risk assessment variable for the third quarter. They were using a linear projection for a market that was historically volatile during the Q3 harvest season. It was a variable mismatch. "Don't say anything," she told herself. "You need this tip. You need this job for Lily." "Are you done hovering?" Dominic's voice cut through her thoughts. He didn't look up. He just waved a hand dismissively. Cassidy froze. The arrogance in his tone stung, but it was the mistake on the paper that hurt her physically. It was like seeing a painting hung crooked. "Sorry, sir," Cassidy whispered. She turned to walk away. "We signed the deal at noon, Dom," Preston pressed, snapping a folder shut. $4 billion. It's going to make us legends." Cassidy stopped. $4 billion. If they signed that deal based on that math, the liquidity drag would bankrupt the subsidiary within 6 months. She gripped the coffee pot handle tighter. She thought of Lily, lying in that hospital bed, needing the next round of treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. She thought of her own life, derailed by tragedy, forcing her to hide her gift. But she couldn't let it go. She turned back. "It's not going to work," she said. The silence that followed was heavy. The rain outside seemed to stop. Dominic Sterling finally looked up. His eyes were the color of cold steel. He looked at her apron, her messy bun, the name tag that just read Cass. "Excuse me?" Dominic asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "The deal," Cassidy said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "The risk model on page 4. It assumes a linear progression for the supply chain costs. But Cyberdyne relies on raw lithium imports. If you account for the monsoon season delays in Southeast Asia, which that formula ignores, your EBITDA isn't up 12%. It's down 8%. Preston Hayes let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Is this a joke? Rick, come get your girl." Dominic didn't laugh. He stared at Cassidy. He was studying her face, looking for the prank, the hidden camera. "You're a waitress," Dominic stated flatly. "And you're about to lose $400 million in the first quarter alone," Cassidy replied, her voice gaining strength. "The derivation of the variable X dollars in your denominator is missing the stochastic volatility component." Preston slammed his hand on the table. "This is absurd. She probably heard that word on a podcast. Dom, we have a meeting." Dominic held up a hand to silence Preston. He kept his eyes locked on Cassidy. He reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a clean white linen napkin, and uncapped his gold pen. He slid them across the table. "Prove it," Dominic said. "You have 2 minutes. If you're guessing, I'm getting you fired. If you're right, I'll listen." The coffee shop had gone quiet. Rick, the manager, was watching from the counter with his mouth open, ready to intervene, but too scared of Dominic Sterling to move. Other customers, lawyers, brokers, tired nurses, were watching the scene unfold. Cassidy looked at the napkin. The texture was soft, expensive. It was worth more than her hourly wage. She put the coffee pot down on an empty table. Her hands, usually rough from dishwater and sanitizer, felt steady as soon as she touched the pen. She didn't hesitate. She didn't write numbers. She wrote a differential equation. She started by defining the volatility of the lithium market as a function of time, denoted as sigma tau. She then integrated this into the standard black skulls model they were using, adding a correction term for the seasonal delay she had mentioned. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound of the nib on the linen was the only noise in the room. Preston Hayes stood up, looking over her shoulder, his face flushing red. "This is gibberish, Dom. She's just writing symbols. We are wasting time." "Shut up, Preston," Dominic murmured, leaning forward. Cassidy worked fast. She broke down the formula, step by step. Step 1. Isolate the variable for operational cost. Step 2. Apply the stochastic drift. Step 3. Recalculate the profit margin. She finished in 90 seconds. She circled the final result at the bottom of the napkin. 8.4% Celsius. She capped the pen and slid the napkin back to Dominic. "You aren't acquiring an asset," Cassidy said, her voice trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "You're acquiring a debt sink. The variable for the shipping delay compounds exponentially, not linearly. Whoever wrote this model for you, they either didn't know what they were doing, or they were trying to hide the loss." Dominic stared at the napkin. He wasn't looking at the numbers anymore. He was looking at the elegance of the proof. It wasn't just correct. It was beautiful. It was the kind of math he hadn't seen since his days at Wharton, and even then, this was sharper. He looked up at Preston. Preston's face had gone pale. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, matching the rain on the window. "Preston," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. Did you run the due diligence on the Cyberdyne logistics yourself? My team did, Preston stammered. Dom, you can't possibly take the word of a barista over our analysts. She's... Look at her. Dominic stood up. He was tall, looming over the table. He picked up the napkin and folded it neatly, placing it in his breast pocket. Get the car, Dominic said to Preston. We aren't signing the deal. Dom! Get the car. Preston glared at Cassidy with pure venom, grabbed his briefcase, and stormed out into the rain. Dominic turned to Cassidy. For the first time, he really looked at her. He saw the dark circles under her eyes, the frayed cuffs of her uniform, the intelligence burning behind her guarded expression. What is your name? He asked. Cassidy. Cassidy Miller. Well, Cassidy Miller, Dominic said, pulling out his wallet. He didn't take out cash. He took out a sleek, black business card. You just saved me a fortune, and you cost my CFO his dignity. I don't know who you are or why you are here, but you are wasted pouring coffee. He placed the card on the table. Be at this address at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. He turned to leave, then paused. He pulled out $100 bill and dropped it in the tip jar on her table. And by a calculator, you're doing the math in your head, and it's freaking people out. With that, the billionaire walked out, leaving Cassidy standing in the middle of the diner, the smell of burnt coffee suddenly replaced by the scent of opportunity and danger. Cassidy didn't go to the address the next day. She couldn't. At 9:00 a.m., she was sitting in the sterile waiting room of St. Jude's Medical Center, holding Lily's hand. Lily was 16, pale and fragile, connected to a dialysis machine that hummed rhythmically. You look tired, Cass, Lily whispered, her eyes barely open. Did you pick up a double shift? Something like that, Cassidy lied, smoothing her sister's hair. Don't worry about the money, Lil. I've got it covered. She didn't have it covered. The rent was overdue, and the medical bills were a mounting avalanche. The $100 Dominic had left was already gone, spent on prescriptions. She looked at the black business card in her pocket. Sterling Holloway, 100 Wall Street, penthouse suite. It felt like a trap. Men like Dominic Sterling didn't hire girls like her. They used them, or they made examples of them. Besides, if she went into that world, the world of high finance and background checks, they would find out the truth. They would find out why she left MIT. They would find out about the fire. Cass, she snapped back to reality. Yeah, Lil? Go, Lily said softly. You have that look on your face, the one you get when you're solving a problem. Go do whatever you need to do. Cassidy kissed her sister's forehead. She had no choice. She needed the money. At 10:15 a.m., Cassidy walked into the lobby of Sterling Holloway. She wasn't wearing a suit. She was wearing her best pair of black slacks and a white button-down she had ironed 3 times. She felt woefully underdressed amidst the sea of navy blazers and Italian leather shoes. I'm here to see Mr. Sterling, she told the receptionist, a woman who looked like a supermodel. Do you have an appointment? The receptionist asked, not bothering to hide her skepticism. He told me to come. My name is Cassidy Miller. The receptionist typed something, paused, and her eyebrows shot up. Her attitude shifted instantly. Oh, Ms. Miller. Yes. Mr. Sterling is expecting you in the boardroom. He said to send you up immediately. The elevator ride to the 50th floor made Cassidy's ears pop. When the doors opened, she wasn't led to an office. She was led into a glass-walled conference room. It was full of people. Dominic sat at the head of a long mahogany table. Preston Hayes was there, looking murderous. There were 6 other board members, men and women in expensive suits staring at her as she walked in. Dominic spun his chair around. "You're late." "I had a prior commitment," Cassidy said, clutching her bag. "Sit," Dominic commanded, pointing to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. Cassidy sat. She felt like a mouse in a room full of vipers. "Gentlemen and ladies," Dominic addressed the room. "This is the waitress who found the error in the Cyberdyne deal." A murmur went through the room. Some looked impressed. Most looked skeptical. "Preston here," Dominic continued, gesturing to his CFO. "Claims it was a fluke. He claims you got lucky. He claims you're a corporate spy sent by our competitors to sabotage the deal." Cassidy's eyes widened. "What?" "No, I did a background check on you, Ms. Miller," Preston interrupted, throwing a file onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped in front of her. "Cassidy Miller, born in Ohio, accepted to MIT on a full scholarship at age 16, prodigy-level test scores, and then, poof." Preston stood up, walking toward her. "Expelled in your junior year, accused of academic fraud and arson, a lab fire that caused $2 million in damages." The room gasped. "I didn't do it," Cassidy said, her voice shaking. "The fire, it was an accident, and the fraud charges were fabricated. I was framed." "By whom?" Dominic asked. He was watching her closely, his face unreadable. "By the professor I was working for," Cassidy said, looking Dominic in the eye. "Professor Arthur Vance. He was stealing my work. When I threatened to report him, the lab caught fire. He blamed me. I didn't have the money for a lawyer. I had to leave." "A likely story," Preston sneered. "Dom, she's a liability. A disgraced student working at a diner? We can't let her near the books." Dominic tapped his finger on the table. He looked at Preston, then at Cassidy. "I don't care about your past, Cassidy," Dominic said. "In this building, the only thing that matters is the numbers. Numbers don't lie. People do." He pressed a button on the console in front of him. A massive screen on the wall lit up. It displayed a chaotic mess of data, live trading feeds, currency fluctuations, and a failing bond yield from a European subsidiary. "This is the Gordian knot," Dominic said. "It's a portfolio we've been trying to unwind for 3 months. It's bleeding money. My best analysts say we should sell it at a loss." He looked at Cassidy. "You have 1 hour. Fix it. If you can save this portfolio, you have a job as my personal quantitative strategist. Salary is $200,000 a year plus bonuses." The room went silent. $200,000. That would save Lily. That would change everything. "And if I can't?" Cassidy asked. "Then Preston calls the police," Dominic said coldly. "Because if you can't do the math, then Preston is right. You probably are a spy." Dominic stood up and walked to the door. 1 hour, Ms. Miller. The clock starts now." He walked out, leaving Cassidy alone in the room with 7 hostile board members and a screen full of numbers that looked like a death sentence. Cassidy took a deep breath. She reached into her bag and pulled out her lucky red marker. She walked to the glass wall. She didn't see the board members anymore. She didn't see Preston's smirk. She only saw the patterns. She uncapped the marker. "Let's dance." The marker squeaked against the glass. It was a piercing sound that made the board members wince, but Cassidy didn't hear it. She was in the zone. To anyone else, the Gordian knot portfolio was a disaster. A tangled mess of European bonds, Asian tech futures, and South American mining rights that were all bleeding value simultaneously. It defied standard logic. When the tech sector went up, the mining rights should have stabilized, but they were plummeting. Cassidy's hand flew across the glass wall. She wasn't just doing arithmetic. She was painting a landscape of probability. 30 minutes left. Preston Hayes sat with his arms crossed, a smug grin plastered on his face. He checked his Rolex ostentatiously. "You're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, darling. That portfolio is toxic. We've had MIT graduates, Rhodes scholars, and industry veterans look at this. You think a waitress is going to find the magic number?" Cassidy stopped writing. She stared at a cluster of data points related to a shipping subsidiary in Malta. "It's not toxic," she mumbled. "Speak up," Preston snapped. Cassidy turned around. Her eyes were bright, almost feverish. "The portfolio isn't toxic. It's hollow." She uncapped a blue marker this time. She drew a line connecting the Maltese shipping firm to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, and then another line to a vendor in Zurich. "Look at the trade timestamps," Cassidy said, her voice gaining confidence. "Every time the Asian tech stocks rally, there is an automatic sell order triggered in the South American sector. It happens within 3 milliseconds. That's not market fluctuation. That's an algorithm." One of the board members, an elderly woman named Margaret, leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. "What are you suggesting, Ms. Miller?" "I'm suggesting that the money isn't being lost," Cassidy said, pointing the marker at the center of the web she had drawn. "It's being moved. This isn't a bad investment strategy. It's a laundering cycle. Someone is siphoning trade profits into this account in Zurich, labeled operational overhead. But the math proves there are no operations. The variable for overhead cost is static, regardless of volume. That's impossible in a logistics company." The room went deathly silent. Preston Hayes stood up so fast his chair tipped over. "That is a serious accusation. You are accusing this firm of fraud?" "No," Cassidy said, locking eyes with him. "I'm accusing whoever manages this portfolio of fraud. The math says $200 million has been extracted over the last 18 months. The door opened. Dominic Sterling walked back in. He looked at the glass wall, covered in blue and red equations. He looked at the stunned board members. Finally, he looked at Preston, who was now sweating profusely. "Well?" Dominic asked. "Time is up." Margaret spoke first. "She didn't solve the portfolio, Dominic. She autopsied it. She found a leak, a $200 million leak into a Zurich account." Dominic's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He walked over to the glass wall. He traced the line Cassidy had drawn to the Zurich account. He turned to Preston. "Preston, you manage the European desk personally, don't you?" Preston's face was a mask of panic, though he tried to hold it together. "Dom, this is ridiculous. It's a glitch in the reporting software. I've been meaning to patch it. She's misinterpreting the data." "A glitch doesn't open a bank account in Zurich," Dominic said softly. He turned to Cassidy. "You're hired." "But—" Preston started. "Get out," Dominic said, not even looking at him. "Go to your office. Stay there. Auditing will be down in 10 minutes. If you so much as touch a shredder, I will have you arrested before you reach the elevator." Preston glared at Cassidy, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, and stormed out. Dominic looked at Cassidy. She was trembling slightly, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. "You have a good eye, Ms. Miller," Dominic said. "But you have just made a very powerful enemy. Preston Hayes has been with this company for 10 years. He knows where all the bodies are buried. I just followed the numbers," Cassidy whispered. "Numbers are dangerous things," Dominic replied. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, silver key card. "Welcome to Sterling Holloway. Your first paycheck will be advanced to you today. Get your sister whatever she needs." Cassidy looked up, shocked. "How did you know about my sister?" "I told you," Dominic said, a faint, rare smile touching his lips. "I do my due diligence." "Don't disappoint me, Cassidy." 2 weeks later, Cassidy felt like she was living in a different universe. Her life of grey aprons and burnt coffee was gone, replaced by tailored suits and the hush of the 50th floor. She had moved Lily into a private care facility with a view of the park. The doctors there were optimistic. For the first time in 3 years, Cassidy slept without waking up in a cold sweat about money. But the transition wasn't easy. The other analysts at Sterling Holloway looked at her like she was a laboratory experiment gone wrong. They whispered when she walked by. They knew she hadn't graduated. They knew she used to serve them lattes. They called her the Pet Project. She spent her days in a small, glass-walled office next to Dominic's, crunching numbers that no one else could make sense of. She found efficiency gaps, optimized tax structures, and predicted market shifts with frightening accuracy. But she was lonely. It was late on a Thursday, almost 9 p.m. The office was empty, save for the cleaning crew and the security guards. Cassidy was still working, trying to decipher a strange pattern in a tech merger proposal. "You know, labor laws require you to go home eventually." Cassidy jumped. Dominic was leaning against her doorframe. He had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, looking less like a titan of industry and more like a tired man. "I just wanted to finish this model," Cassidy said, closing her laptop. "I didn't realize it was so late." "Hungry?" Dominic asked. "I can grab something on the way home." "Don't be ridiculous. Come on." He didn't give her a choice. He led her up a private staircase she hadn't noticed before, opening a door to the roof. Cassidy gasped. The roof was a landscaped garden, high above the city. The wind whipped around them, but the view was breathtaking, a sea of lights stretching to the horizon. There was a small table set up with takeout containers. "Thai food," Dominic said, sitting down and opening a box. "My guilty pleasure. The board thinks I eat caviar and endangered birds, I assume." Cassidy smiled nervously and sat down. "Probably." They ate in silence for a moment. It was strange sitting here with a man worth billions, eating pad thai out of a cardboard box. "Why did you do it?" Cassidy asked suddenly. "Why did you hire me? You could have just paid me for the tip and sent me away." Dominic looked out at the city. "Because I know what it's like to be the smartest person in the room and have no one listen to you because of where you came from." Cassidy looked at him in surprise. "But you're a Sterling. You come from old money." Dominic laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "That's the PR version. My father was a Sterling, yes. But he was the black sheep. He gambled away his inheritance before I was born. My mother cleaned houses to keep us fed. I went to Wharton on a scholarship, just like you went to MIT. I clawed my way back into this building. I took it back, brick by brick." He looked at her, his eyes intense. "I saw the hunger in your eyes, Cassidy, the desperation, and the brilliance. I don't hire degrees. I hire survivors." Cassidy felt a lump in her throat. She had spent so long hiding her past, hiding her struggle. To be seen, really seen, was overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Dominic said darkly. "Preston is gone, but he's not out of the picture. He's suing for wrongful termination. And he's digging into your past, Cassidy. The fire at MIT." Cassidy froze. The noodles turned to ash in her mouth. "He's going to try to use it to discredit you," Dominic continued, "and by extension, discredit the work you're doing for me. I need to know the truth. Not the police report version. The truth." Cassidy put down her fork. She looked at her hands. "Professor Blackwood," she said, correcting the name she had used in the interview. The name of the man who ruined her life. He was working on a predictive algorithm for high-frequency trading. but he couldn't get the latency down. I fixed it. I wrote the code. When I found out he was planning to sell it to a foreign firm without the university's permission, I confronted him. She took a shaky breath. He locked me in the lab. He set the fire to destroy the servers, to destroy the evidence. He knew the sprinklers would ruin the hard drives. He dragged me out and told the police I had been experimenting with unstable cooling systems. It was his word against mine. He was a tenured genius. I was a scholarship kid from Ohio. Dominic listened, his jaw tightening. "Do you have proof?" "No," Cassidy said. "Everything burned." "Not everything," Dominic said. "You're still here, and your mind is still here." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His skin was warm, his grip firm. "We're going to fight him, Cassidy. Preston and Blackwood. But you need to trust me." For the first time in her life, Cassidy looked at a man and didn't see a threat. She saw an ally, maybe even something more. "I trust you," she said. Just then, Dominic's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression hardened instantly. He pulled his hand away. "What is it?" Cassidy asked. "Security alert," Dominic said, standing up abruptly. "Someone just tried to access the mainframe using your login credentials." I've been here with you," Cassidy stammered. "I know," Dominic said. "Which means someone is trying to frame you. Again." He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the stairs. "We need to get to the server room. Now." The server room on the 40th floor was a fortress of glass and humming machinery, cooled to a shivering 50 degrees. When Dominic and Cassidy burst through the secure doors, the air was thick with the whine of spinning hard drives. It was empty of people, but the central terminal was active. Rows of red code cascaded down the main monitor, moving so fast it was a blur. "They're scrubbing the drives," Cassidy gasped, running to the keyboard. Her fingers flew across the keys, her eyes darting across the screen. Someone is remotely wiping the entire company database, client records, trade secrets, the algorithms, and they're routing the command through my terminal ID. "Can you stop it?" Dominic asked, his voice calm but tight. He was already on his phone, barking orders to security to lock down the building. "It's a polymorphic worm," Cassidy said, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold. "It rewrites itself every time I try to isolate it. It's elegant. Evil, but elegant." She paused, her breath hitching. She recognized the syntax, the way the code looped back on itself, using a recursive variable based on prime numbers. "It's Blackwood," she whispered. "This is his code. I'd recognize it anywhere. He's not just destroying the data, he's stealing it. He's tunneling it out to an external server." Preston, Dominic realized. Preston must have brought him in. He gave Blackwood the back door access. "If I don't stop this in 60 seconds, the backups will be corrupted too," Cassidy said. "Sterling Holloway will cease to exist." "Do what you do, Cassidy," Dominic said, stepping back to give her space. "Don't think about the money. Don't think about the job. Just solve the equation." Cassidy closed her eyes for a split second. She pictured the code not as lines of text, but as a fluid, dynamic system. It was a flow of water. To stop the flow, she didn't need to build a dam. She needed to change the gravity. She opened her eyes and started typing. She didn't try to delete the worm. Instead, she fed it. She created a feedback loop, a mathematical paradox, a set of data that was infinitely complex, but ultimately meaningless. Input: define x, where x after x plus 1, and x after x, 1. She injected the paradox into the worm's core logic. The red code on the screen froze. The worm tried to process the impossible command. It consumed its own processing power, spinning faster and faster until pop. The screen went black. Then a single green line of text appeared. System restored. Threat isolated. Cassidy slumped against the desk, her knees giving out. Dominic caught her before she hit the floor. "You did it," he breathed, pulling her into a hug. The adrenaline was still coursing through them, electric and terrifying. "I didn't just stop it," Cassidy said, pulling away and pointing at the screen. "I traced the signal back to the source. The tunnel they opened works both ways." She typed one final command. A physical address popped up on the map overlay. 40 Industrial Way, Warehouse 4. "That's where they are," Cassidy said, her voice hard. "Preston and Blackwood. They're waiting for the data packet." Dominic looked at the address, then at Cassidy. His eyes were cold, dangerous. "Stay here with security. I'm going to pay them a visit." "No," Cassidy said, standing up straight. She smoothed her skirt, the waitress from the diner gone, replaced by the woman who had just saved a billion-dollar empire. "I'm coming with you. I ran from Blackwood once. I'm not running anymore." Dominic hesitated, then nodded. "Let's go." The warehouse was dark, lit only by the glow of a few laptops set up on a folding table. Preston Hayes was pacing back and forth, holding a bottle of champagne. An older man with wild grey hair, Professor Blackwood, was hunched over a computer, cursing. "What do you mean it stopped?" Preston yelled. "We were at 90%. It's stuck," Blackwood stammered. "The code entered a logic loop. It's eating itself. I can't override it. It's like someone fed it a poison pill." "You said you were a genius," Preston shouted, throwing the champagne bottle. It shattered against the concrete wall. "And you said the girl was just a waitress," Blackwood shot back. "This is her signature. I know her work. She countered my recursion with a paradox. She's better than me. She always was." "Gentlemen," a voice boomed from the darkness. Preston and Blackwood froze. Dominic Sterling stepped into the light, flanked by two large security officers. But it was the woman standing next to him that made Blackwood turn pale. "Hello, Professor," Cassidy said. Her voice didn't shake. "Did you get the file I sent back? It's a complete log of your intrusion attempts, time-stamped and signed with your IP address." "Cassidy," Blackwood whispered. I was just testing the system for security." "Save it for the judge," Dominic said. "The police are already outside. And Preston?" Preston looked like he was about to vomit. "Dom, listen, I can explain. It was a stress test. I was trying to show you she wasn't ready." Dominic walked up to Preston. He didn't yell. He didn't hit him. He just looked at him with profound disappointment. "You were right about one thing, Preston," Dominic said. "She wasn't ready to be an analyst. She was ready to be a partner. You, on the other hand, are done." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. The red and blue lights began to flash through the high windows of the warehouse. Cassidy walked up to the table where Blackwood sat. She looked down at the professor who had stolen her future, the man who had made her believe she was nothing. "The formula you stole 3 years ago," she said softly. "The one you framed me for. It had a flaw in the third variable. I fixed it tonight. Now it works, and it belongs to Sterling Holloway." Blackwood slumped in his chair, defeated by the very math he had tried to exploit. As the police burst in, cuffing the two men, Dominic took Cassidy's hand. They walked out of the warehouse into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The city skyline twinkled in the distance, promising a future that was finally, mathematically, perfect. The flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers painted the wet pavement of the warehouse district in chaotic strokes of color. It was 3:00 a.m., but for Cassidy Miller, the world felt brighter than it had in years. She watched from the back seat of Dominic Sterling's black sedan, as the police escorted two men into separate vehicles. Preston Hayes looked small, his expensive suit rumpled, his face a mask of defeat. Professor Arthur Blackwood, the man who had haunted Cassidy's nightmares for 3 years, looked even worse. He was shouting at the officers, babbling about intellectual property rights. But no one was listening. The math didn't lie, and the digital trail Cassidy had uncovered was a steel cage he couldn't calculate his way out of. "It's over." Dominic's voice broke the silence inside the car. Cassidy turned to look at him. He was sitting on the leather seat next to her, looking exhausted, but relieved. He held a bag of ice against his hand, which he had bruised when he'd slammed it against the warehouse door to get in. "Is it?" Cassidy asked, her voice quiet. "The press will be all over this." "The scandal?" "Let them talk," Dominic said, lowering the ice pack. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "The stock will dip for a day or two. Then, when the street realizes we purged the rot and installed a genius as our new chief strategy officer, it will rally higher than ever." Cassidy blinked. "Chief strategy officer? I thought I was an analyst." "That was before you saved the company," Dominic said, a small, tired smile playing on his lips. "Analyst doesn't quite cover it anymore, Cassidy." The driver started the car, pulling away from the scene of the crime. Cassidy leaned her head back against the seat, watching the city lights blur past. For the first time since the fire at MIT, she didn't feel like she was running. She felt like she was arriving. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind, but not in the corporate sense. The first battle wasn't the stock market. It was St. Jude's Hospital. With the advance Dominic had given her, and the substantial bonus that hit her account the morning after the warehouse raid, Cassidy didn't just pay the overdue bills. She moved Lily. 3 weeks after the arrest, Cassidy sat in a private waiting room at the finest renal specialist center in New York. The walls were painted a calming sage green, and soft classical music played in the background, but Cassidy's leg was bouncing nervously. Lily was in surgery, a kidney transplant. It was the procedure they had been denied for 2 years because of insurance caps and insufficient funds. The door to the waiting room opened. Cassidy jumped up, expecting the surgeon. It was Dominic. He was wearing a charcoal grey suit, looking like he had just walked out of a board meeting, which he probably had. He carried 2 paper cups of coffee and a brown paper bag. "I didn't think you'd come," Cassidy said, surprised. "The quarterly earnings call is today." "I postponed it," Dominic said simply, handing her a coffee. "Some things are more important than earnings per share." He sat down next to her on the sofa. "How long has she been in?" 4 hours. Cassidy checked her watch, her hand trembling slightly. "They said it could take 6. Dominic noticed the tremor. He reached out and took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. He didn't say anything cheesy. He didn't tell her everything would be fine, because men like Dominic dealt in probabilities, not platitudes. He just offered his presence as a constant variable in her chaotic equation. "You should eat," he said, nodding at the bag. "I went to that bakery you like, the one near the old diner. Got you a bear claw." Cassidy let out a watery laugh. "You went to the grind? In a $3,000 suit?" "Rick asked if I wanted an application." Dominic deadpanned. They sat like that for another 2 hours, hand in hand, sharing a pastry, while the clock ticked on the wall. When the surgeon finally emerged, pulling off his surgical cap with a smile, Cassidy collapsed against Dominic's shoulder in relief. "She's fine," the surgeon said. "The graft is perfect. She's going to have a normal life, Miss Miller." Cassidy cried then. She hadn't cried when she was expelled. She hadn't cried when she was fired from her first 3 jobs. She hadn't cried in the warehouse. But she cried now, burying her face in Dominic's suit jacket, ruining the expensive wool with her tears. Dominic just held her, stroking her hair, anchoring her to the earth. 3 months later, the atmosphere at Sterling Holloway had transformed. The fear that Preston Hayes had used to rule the office was gone, replaced by a buzzing energy of innovation. Cassidy Miller walked down the hallway of the 50th floor. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a cream-colored pencil skirt and a silk blouse, her hair blow-dried into sleek waves. She carried a tablet, not a coffee pot. "Good morning, Ms. Miller," a junior analyst chirped as she passed. "Morning, Dave. Check your variance on the Solar Tech merger. You're off by 0.03%, she said, without breaking stride. "On it," Dave called back, looking terrified and impressed. Cassidy walked into the conference room. It was the same room where she had faced the board during her trial months ago. Today, she sat at the right hand of the head of the table. Dominic was already there, reviewing the agenda. When she walked in, he didn't look up immediately, but she saw the corner of his mouth twitch upward. "You're late," he teased, echoing their first meeting. "I was recalibrating the risk assessment for the Tokyo expansion," she countered, sliding into her chair. "You were being too conservative." "I am never conservative," Dominic said, finally looking at her. His eyes lingered on her face, a second too long for a strictly professional relationship. The tension between them had been building for months, a slow, exponential curve that was heading toward a vertical limit. The meeting began. It was a negotiation with a rival firm, Blackstone & Co., led by a shark named Victor Cross. Victor was an old-school bully. He spent the first 20 minutes talking over Cassidy, addressing only Dominic. "Look, Dom," Victor said, leaning back in his chair. "The valuation you're asking for the logistics arm is fantasy. We're offering $2 billion. Take it or leave it. Your little spreadsheets are cute, but the market is the market." Dominic stayed silent. He tapped his pen on the table, then gestured to Cassidy. "I don't think you've heard Ms. Miller's perspective yet." Victor sneered at Cassidy. "The former waitress? No offense, sweetheart, but the adults are talking." The room went deadly quiet. The Sterling Holloway team looked at Victor with a mix of pity and horror. They knew what was coming. Cassidy didn't get angry. She didn't yell. She just tapped her tablet, projecting a graph onto the main screen. "Mr. Cross," Cassidy began, her voice cool and melodic, "I ran a regression analysis on Blackstone's liquidity over the last 4 quarters. You aren't offering $2 billion because that's what our asset is worth. You're offering $2 billion because that is exactly the amount of debt you have maturing next month in your offshore bonds." Victor's face went pale. "You need our cash flow to service your debt," Cassidy continued, standing up and walking to the screen. "If you don't close this deal by Friday, your credit rating drops to junk status. So, here is the new price, $3.5 billion, and you will issue a public apology for the sweetheart comment." She placed the tablet down. "The math says you have no other choice." Victor looked at Dominic. Dominic just shrugged. "She showed her work, Victor. I suggest you sign." Victor signed. As the room cleared out, victorious and buzzing, Dominic remained seated. Cassidy gathered her files. "Remind me never to play poker with you," Dominic said softly. "You can play," Cassidy smiled. "You'll just lose." "Maybe I'm tired of winning alone," Dominic said. The air shifted. The professional distance evaporated. He stood up and walked toward her. He was close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood and rain. He reached out, his hand hovering near her waist. But then the glass door opened. "Ms. Miller, your sister is on line 1, the receptionist called out. The moment shattered. Dominic stepped back, clearing his throat. "You should take that." Cassidy nodded, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Yeah, I should." She walked out, but she could feel his eyes on her until she turned the corner. 6 months after the rainy morning in the diner, the night of the Innovators in Finance Gala arrived. It was the premier event of the New York social season, held at the Plaza Hotel. Cassidy had tried to get out of it. She preferred spreadsheets to ballrooms. But Dominic had insisted. "It's a victory lap, Cassidy. We earned it." She arrived in a limousine provided by the company. When she stepped out onto the red carpet, the flashbulbs were blinding. The press knew her story now. The Cinderella of Wall Street, they called her. She hated the nickname. Cinderella needed a fairy godmother. Cassidy had used calculus. She wore a gown of deep emerald green silk that draped off her shoulders and pooled around her feet. It was simple, elegant, and cut with a precision that highlighted her silhouette. Her hair was swept up, revealing the diamond drop earrings that Lily had insisted she buy. "You look—" Cassidy turned at the top of the grand staircase. Dominic was waiting for her. He stopped speaking. For a man who could talk his way out of a hostile takeover, he seemed completely at a loss for words. He took in the sight of her, his eyes dark and appreciative. "Statistically improbable," he finished, a grin spreading across his face. "Is that a compliment?" Cassidy laughed, taking his offered arm. "It's the highest one I know," he replied. They walked into the ballroom together. Heads turned. Whispers followed them like a wake behind a ship. But Cassidy didn't feel small anymore. She felt the strength of the man beside her, and more importantly, the strength within herself. They spent the evening shaking hands. Cassidy dazzled the room. She spoke fluent Mandarin to the investors from Beijing, discussed macroeconomics with the Secretary of the Treasury, and charmed the press. But as the night wore on, the noise began to feel overwhelming. "Too much data?" Dominic whispered in her ear. "System overload," she admitted. "Come with me." He led her away from the crowd, through a side door, and out onto the private terrace overlooking Central Park. The night air was crisp, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the ballroom. The city skyline twinkled before them, a grid of lights and possibilities. Dominic loosened his bow tie and leaned against the stone railing. Cassidy stood beside him, the silence between them comfortable, heavy with unspoken things. "I have something for you," Dominic said suddenly. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. Cassidy's heart skipped a beat. She watched as he pulled out a small, flat object encased in a simple glass frame. She took it, moving it into the light. It was a napkin. The white linen was stained with brown coffee rings. In the center, written in aggressive red ink, was a differential equation, and at the bottom, circled 3 times, was the number 8.4%. "You kept it," Cassidy whispered, her thumb tracing the glass. "It's the most valuable asset I own," Dominic said. "It's a napkin, Dominic." "No," he shook his head, turning to face her fully. "It's the moment everything changed. Before that napkin, I was just building an empire. I was acquiring companies, stacking money, trying to prove to my dead father that I wasn't a failure, but I was empty." He took a step closer. The wind caught a loose strand of Cassidy's hair, and he reached out to tuck it behind her ear. His hand lingered on her cheek. "You didn't just solve the equation for the Cyberdyne deal, Cassidy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You solved the equation for me. You taught me that the variables that matter aren't the ones on the balance sheet. They're trust, loyalty, resilience." He looked deep into her eyes. "And love." The word hung in the air, absolute and undeniable. "I ran the numbers, Cassidy," Dominic continued, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I've analyzed every possible outcome, every scenario, and the probability of me being able to live another day without you by my side is 0. Cassidy felt tears prick her eyes, But she smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had finally found the solution she had been searching for her whole life. "Your methodology is sound," she whispered. "Is that a peer review?" Dominic asked, leaning in. "It's an approval," she breathed. Dominic closed the gap. He kissed her, and it wasn't tentative or calculated. It was passionate, a collision of two worlds that fit together perfectly. It tasted like champagne and the cold night air, and it felt like coming home. For years, Cassidy had viewed the world as a series of problems to be solved, a chaotic system that needed to be ordered. But as Dominic held her under the stars, she realized that some things couldn't be quantified. Some things didn't follow a linear progression. The music from the ballroom drifted out to the terrace, a slow, sweeping waltz. Dominic pulled back slightly, resting his forehead against hers. "So, Ms. Miller, what is our projection for the next quarter?" Cassidy looked at the napkin in her hand, then up at the man who had given her a second chance at life. She threw the napkin onto the stone bench. She didn't need it anymore. "Infinite growth," she said. Dominic laughed, lifting her off the ground as he spun her around. "I like those numbers." Inside, the gala continued, the world of finance turning its gears, chasing the next billion. But on the balcony, amidst the shadows and the starlight, Cassidy Miller and Dominic Sterling had found the only thing that was truly priceless. And that is the incredible story of Cassidy Miller. She went from an invisible waitress wiping tables to a powerhouse in the boardroom, all because she refused to let her brilliance be extinguished by her past. It just goes to show that genius can be found in the most unexpected places, sometimes right in front of us, pouring our coffee. Dominic Sterling thought he was just saving a business deal, but he ended up finding the one person who could complete his life's equation. What did you think of that ending? I have to admit, I teared up a little when Dominic revealed he kept the napkin. Did you think Cassidy should have forgiven him so easily for the initial doubt, or did he earn his redemption? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading your theories and reactions. If this story touched your heart or inspired you to trust your own talents, please hit that like button. It really supports the channel. And make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.